Hello again, this is Red Vitus, and I have some mail today. This is a watch that I ordered, shipped to me all the way from Eastern Europe. So I waited quite a while for this watch, and can't wait to look inside. Now this is a watch movement. I don't have a case for this watch, but I've always wanted to work on one of these. This is a Hamilton 912, 12S size movement. And this one, you can see the balance is spinning quite freely, but it wouldn't wind, which I was a little disappointed by because I purchased it as a running watch. But given that I love the dial and it didn't look like there'd be any balance work, I decided to keep it. Let's see if I can get it running. Now first, I'll remove the hour and minute hand. And next, I'll loosen the 3 dial screws there on the side of the movement. Once those are loosened, I can lift up the dial, and that will remove the seconds hand at the same time. So there goes the seconds hand, and now I pry off the dial. And there it is. You can see the 3 dial feet, and this is a metal dial, so I'm going to put that away safely and work on the movement. There went the hour hand, sorry, the hour wheel. And there's a series of gears to set the watch. The brass one is the minute wheel. Right now I'm removing the cannon pinion. This is a pin vise, so I tighten that, not until my knuckles turn white, but just enough to lift it up. And it went most of the way, and I finished it off with a tweezer. So that cover plate prevents the wheels, just prevents the wheels from falling out. It has one little screw that I'll remove next. As I lift off that cover plate, there'll be a gear that's stuck to it with oil, which you won't see. And there's one other small winding gear that stayed in place. That's the minute wheel. Now that winding gear, if we look at both sides, one side is beveled and the other side is flat. So when I reinstall that, I make sure to put the bevel side down. Onto the rest of the keyless works. This piece is a clutch lever. I'm loosening the screw. In a modern watch, they'd probably call this a yoke. Serves the same function as far as I know. It moves the clutch or sliding pinion back and forth to change from winding to setting. And as I lift it up, that relaxes the clutch lever spring. There you can have a good look at that piece. And the next part I'll remove is the set lever spring. I'm removing it because it had some rust, and I want to remove that before I put the watch back together. Now this is a pretty big spring. I mean, this one has a lot of power behind it, and so we got to be careful when we remove it. Now modern watches have a set lever spring, but it really doesn't resemble the springs in these old watches. This one, you got to be careful handling, and you see now how I cover it and remove the tension. And there's still a little bit of tension in that spring, so I cover it again, and with the oiler, just pry it out of place. And there it goes, nice and safely. And now I can move on to the back of the watch. First part I'll remove is the ratchet wheel. And as we know, the ratchet wheel, when you wind a watch, what you're really doing is turning that ratchet wheel, and that is winding the mainspring. This ratchet wheel has a really nice pattern. I think it's called snailing. And I think when this watch is cleaned up, it'll really pop. Now I'm removing the click. And as I lift up the click, I hesitate there for a second. I'm looking for the click spring, which I don't see. But then once it's removed, what I see is that the click spring is actually housed inside the click. There's an opening on the edge, and so it's removed as one piece. This next part is the crown wheel, and it has a left-handed screw. Now I can recognize by just looking at the watch that it's a left-handed screw, having dealt with well, dozens of watches. But if you're not sure, what you can do is you can actually remove the entire plate and look at the threads from the back, and just by judging the orientation, you can tell if it's a left-handed or right-handed screw. Now, if you're ever not sure, don't guess, because if you're wrong, you could turn the head right off the body of the screw. So while I'm removing this barrel bridge, let me say a little bit about this watch. As I mentioned, it's a Hamilton 912, a gents watch. These were 12S size, so smaller watches for the time, and well, thinner as well. Now these watches were made in quite large numbers. I think somewhere around 200 to 300,000 of these watches were made. But don't let that lead you to believe it's not a quality watch. I mean, you can see the patterning on this watch. It's really beautiful. They have Geneva stripes, perlage, and that snailing pattern. 17 jewels. I mean, this is a Hamilton watch, and it was made to their high standards. So having removed the barrel bridge, there's the center wheel. And this winding assembly has a series of gears. I'm going to take that apart to show you the pieces. So first, the piece on the end is a rod that activates the set lever. The next piece is the clutch, or sliding pinion. Next is the winding pinion. And lastly, the stem. Now I'm removing the train bridge, and that'll give me access to the rest of the train gears. I could have removed the barrel and probably the third wheel, but because they're partially blocked, I'd have to sort of angle them out, and I prefer just to lift them straight up. So first the third wheel. Next the fourth wheel. And we always want to lift that straight up because it has a long pivot, and that's where the seconds hand attaches. And then there's, of course, the barrel, which I'll be opening later. And the escape wheel. Now I'm removing, what you can't see is I'm loosening some screws to access the collet on the balance wheel. So you can't really see me loosening those over my hands because the screws are quite small. So I like to separate the balance from the balance cock. Now what I'm doing here is I'm lowering the spring out of the regulator pins, and next I'm going to remove the collet. So I'll show that again in slow motion. I bring the oiler behind and just push it out. So hopefully you could see that. The collet is out, but it's not quite free of the balance yet. I just need to rotate it a little bit. Okay, and now they're separated, and I can remove the balance cock without with leaving the balance in place. I had some issues getting this balance cock off and wound up just having to grab it with the tweezers and lifting it up. And you might hear me breathing heavily. That was kind of a stressful thing. So there's the balance, and I think it also shows why I like to separate the balance cock and balance when I remove them. Now next, this is the pallet bridge. It has 2 screws. If it had 1 screw, as they normally do, it would be a pallet cock. So I loosen and remove that bridge to access the pallet fork. And that's the last piece of the escapement coming out. With this flashlight, I'm looking for jewels, checking for any cracked jewels. I don't see any, but I'll really have to clean it off to get a better look. Now the last piece is this set lever. Again, this is a piece you would find in a modern watch, although it would usually be on the other side of the pillar plate. So it has 1 screw and just lifts off. So that completes the disassembly. Now I'm pegging the jewels. I do this to remove old oils, which tend to turn gummy and solidify over time, and just pegging them helps loosen up that dirt and clean them out. I am doing a first for this watch. I'm using a cleaning machine. Nothing fancy, just a sonic cleaner. But I've made my own cleaning solution, so I'm going to try that out. Now, I hope you can appreciate, I'm not going to share the recipe. I don't know if it's a good cleaner yet. I can tell you that it's water-based, but other than that, it's going to be a test for me. So yeah, by pegging these holes, I remove a lot of dirt that doesn't contaminate the cleaning solution. So I like to get all the jewels, and I also like to work around some of the posts for the wheels because dirt tends to build up there. Now I'm popping off the barrel lid, and wow, I have 2 mainsprings, or at least 2 pieces of one. So now I know why the watch wasn't running. It had an old steel mainspring. I probably would have replaced this anyway. These crack a lot and break. It just makes it more difficult to remove it. So I just use a steel tweezer, start it out, and then let it unwind in a controlled way. And there it goes. Now fast forwarding a few days later, I have a new alloy mainspring wound in the mainspring winder. And I'm just going to pop that in. So that little piece that hangs out is the bridle. I have to do that because there's a notch in the barrel that has to align with that tab on the bridle. There's a tab on both ends. So I line that up and hold that bridle in place with a screwdriver so it doesn't slip. And there it is in the barrel. So now I lubricate. So I place some oil on the bottom, on the little notch where the arbor connects to it, the mainspring, and 4 little streaks of oil on the spring. I also oil the bottom of the barrel, which rubs against the arbor. So here's the arbor, which I'm putting in with a sturdy set of tweezers. And I oil the barrel lid in a similar manner as the bottom. Then I line it up with the tab on the bridle. And press it into place. Although this doesn't press it all the way, this just gets it started. I follow up with tweezers, and it snaps together. Now I can begin assembly. Start by placing some HP 1300. And then here's the set lever. With a set lever screw that once it was tightened all the way, the set lever wouldn't move. So I looked up the parts on this watch, and it looks like the set lever, clutch lever, and the click all use the same screw. So later I swapped it out with one of the other screws, and it seemed to have more freedom. So this is that winding gear assembly. Just in the interest of time, I already have it put back together. You saw me take it apart. There's a few places to put oil or grease on the rod in between the two gears, and on the square and round parts of the where those gears connect to the stem. So I set that in place, and I'm going to temporarily put the barrel bridge on, because when I flip the watch over, I don't want that winding pinion to fall out. There may be a more efficient way of doing this, but I haven't worked on one of these before, and this seemed to work, or at least it seemed to make sense. All right, so I'm applying some grease onto the clutch, and then oil. I'm going to oil the clutch lever post and put that into place. So there's the clutch lever. It turns out that the clutch has to be in the setting position for me to put into place. The setting lever on the other side kind of doesn't move on its own, so I had to try a few things to get this all set up. Okay, so there I'm moving the clutch, and now it fits in there better. Having it in, I can now screw it in place. So I like to test things as I go as well. I have a little brass winder. So although I edited that out, I did press in the clutch and make sure that it changed positions. So I'm applying some grease to that pin on the setting lever. That's where the setting lever spring will contact it. Next, I'll install that spring, which is now free of rust, and I'll put it in place pretty much exactly the opposite way that I took it out. So again, covering one end while setting the spring in place on the other side of that pin. So now I can test the setting action once I get this spring screwed in. We don't want that flying out. and that's working well. Having that done, I can flip the movement back over and start assembling the train. First step is to remove the bridge. Then the escape wheel in place. The fourth wheel. And the third wheel. The third wheel has to go in along with the other two wheels because it's partially covered by this train bridge. Setting these bridges is always a little delicate. We want to make sure the pins line up with the jewels. So we work step by step. We don't tighten the screws all the way until we're sure that the wheels are in the right positions. And so I loosely screw them in, check the gears, and then tighten them. One advantage of these 3/4 plate movements over the full plate movements, like the one that I worked on before with the Hamilton 940, is that you can do a couple gears at a time, so you don't have to have everything perfectly in place. So there's the barrel and the center wheel. Now you might be seeing something on that barrel that looks like a hair, but I went back and checked, and it's a scratch. That barrel bridge really just pops right into place. I mean, that's just a sign, I think, of a well-made movement when the wheels and the pivots just seem to go in perfectly on the first try. So I can now tighten the bridge. And it has 3 screws. Place a little bit of oil on the click post. There's the click. There's the click screw. Let's test the action. Yep, it's working fine. It's a spring. Okay, now there's the ratchet wheel. And the ratchet wheel screw. And next, the crown wheel. So there's a wheel and a bushing. The bushing, I love the bushings on these old movements. I mean, they have them on modern movements, but they're almost so small you'd miss them if you weren't looking for them. But this is a really well-made watch and a nice decorated crown wheel. Remember, this is a left-handed screw. If you didn't remember, you'd figure it out. And now I can test it. And it winds just great. So next is the pallet fork for the escapement. The pallet fork is that little eccentric part. So placing that in is always a challenge with lighting and with access. So I use my three times magnification loop to see what I'm doing. Now I place the bridge in place. And with some difficulty, I get these screws on. Sorry about my head being in the way. I'm a better watch repairer than a cameraman. So I'm satisfied that that's working. So I have I skipped ahead. I have the balance in place, but I'm working that collet into position. I didn't show this on the Hamilton 940 video, but I'm showing it here. So you see, I just worked that collet right into that clamp area. And then I tighten the two screws. And there it goes. So that's a good sight to see this watch working again. And now I'll finish by tightening the balance cock. And although it was ticking, it really wasn't ticking that well. It was making some noise, and what I realized later was the balance was touching the pallet bridge. So I removed it, and the balance bridge wasn't screwed down all the way. So once I did that, I took care of that. It started ticking a lot better. So I put the watch on the timing machine just to see where it is, and it's running pretty fast. The amplitude looks good, although that is kind of misleading. I don't know the lift angle on this watch, so it really isn't giving an amplitude of 300. If I knew the lift angle, it would read properly. So this is take this amplitude as just a reference point. But the beat error is good, almost zero. And yeah, this watch is working great. So now you can see the balance in slow motion. And this is about an amplitude based on the balance swing of about 225. Now I've regulated it, and we're getting slightly above somewhere around 1 to 5 seconds a day, which is a big improvement. And I'm going to call this watch complete. So again, I don't have a case for this watch, but as a collector of watch movements, this was one I was thrilled to work on. I'm glad I had the chance, and happy to share it with you. This is Red Vitus, and thanks for visiting my channel.